Our guest on This is America and the World is David Ignatius. He's the award-winning foreign affairs columnist for the Washington Post, former executive editor of the International Herald Tribune, and former reporter with the Wall Street Journal. David Ignatius is also the author of 11 spy thrillers, his latest, The Paladin. David Ignatius, good to be with you once again.
Pleasure, Dennis. I've really enjoyed talking to you over many years.
Complicated world nowadays, huh? When you look at the world, what do you see?
Well, I look at American power in eclipse. Afghanistan is the most dramatic evidence of that. The United States tried for 20 years to suppress the Taliban, to create a more modern Afghanistan that would be a strong counterterrorism partner, and it failed. There's just no other way to put it. We were not successful, and we withdrew our troops, and I think that told us something about the inability to achieve some outcomes using our enormous military power. China is getting more powerful. I think the United States is still struggling to figure out a wise strategy for dealing with China. We're having difficulties with our European allies. It seemed initially when President Biden took office that the world was relieved that America was back. That was the phrase that Biden used. The Europeans certainly were relieved that Trump, who'd been so antagonistic towards Germany, France, other European countries, was replaced by somebody new. But now by October, we're having difficulties anew with our European allies. So I think this is a period in which the world is sorting itself out. American power is changing. America's willingness to bear certain traditional responsibilities is changing. So I think for some years, we'll be in a period of transition.
Is there a dramatic change in foreign policy between President Trump and now President Biden?
I think there is a change in the outward symbols. America has rejoined multilateral organizations. It's back in the Paris Climate Accords. It's more active in the United Nations and other international organizations. I do think that the underlying state of our union, the willingness of the American people to support a forward-leaning foreign policy, is as fragile as it was during Donald Trump's presidency. One reason Donald Trump got elected, clearly, was that the country just was sick of the kinds of commitments that had been made, the endless wars, the spending dollars and human lives overseas, and people felt that they weren't getting an adequate return, and they wanted to put America first. That was Trump's slogan. And Biden, although he had a very different rhetoric, more like the traditional internationalism that we associate with the foreign policy establishment, if you will. His foreign policy in practice has been closer to America first than I would have thought. We haven't gotten into trade deals. The central issue for Biden has been taking care of the domestic economy, not making new agreements with allies overseas. Trump talked about pulling the troops out of Afghanistan. Biden actually did it. Mm-hmm. So I think in some odd ways, there's more continuity than I would have expected.
That's an interesting statement right there. More of the same in a way?
Again, Dennis, I think what's a constant is the desire of the American people for a change in what they felt was a foreign policy that didn't take the interests of the American middle class seriously enough. And I think Biden has responded to that. I personally think that the trade deal known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which Obama worked so hard to negotiate, is very much in America's interest. I think it gives us leadership in Asia. It helps us write the rules for a rising China. I think it's really a good thing. But not enough Americans share that belief. Both Hillary Clinton and Trump in 2016, Biden and Trump in 2020 opposed this deal. So that's just one small sign that the kinds of foreign policy, trade policy moves that once were just routine, shared by both parties, now are rejected by both parties. So we're in a different space than we were certainly when I was growing up, learning about the world as a journalist. It's a different time now.
If you turn the clock back, say 5, 10, 15, 20 years, is the role of the United States dramatically different than what it was back then, nowadays? I mean, we used to be number one. We used to be number one. Are we not number one anymore?
We are number one, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that our military is so much more powerful than any other set of militaries combined, that we shouldn't lose sight of that. But we've also seen the limits of that enormous military power. We couldn't remake Iraq as far as we tried. We couldn't remake Afghanistan, a small country of 38 million people, a landlocked, traditional society. We poured $1 trillion there. At the height of our commitment in Afghanistan, we had 100,000 American troops, and we could not force the political changes that we wanted. So we've seen the limits of American power. I think we've seen the limits of American patience. We're not really very good imperialists, thank goodness. We don't want to be an imperial nation, but the patience to stick it out year after year in the way that the British most notably did. The American people just don't have a tolerance for that. And I think, Dennis, finally, there really is a broad questioning in America now about what led to the erosion of our middle class. The people at the top end of the scale, people who were benefiting from the global economy, who were tied to trade, expanding trade with China and Europe, who live in places like New York and Seattle and San Francisco and Los Angeles, those people did great. But it is true that people living in the middle of the country felt they were being left behind. And Trump clearly tried to speak for them. I think Biden wants to speak for them. I think that's his definition of being a successful president, is winning back support from those people. But that implies a different foreign policy than we're used to from Democrats.
Let's take a little break. Talking with David Ignatius of the Washington Post. He writes on foreign affairs columnist. Just brilliant writing. Also a novelist as well. We'll talk a little bit about that toward the end of our second program. Take a little break right now. This is America and the World. Underwriting for This is America and the World is made possible by the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., the Republic of Uzbekistan, the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Morocco, the National Association for Children of Addiction, Faces and Voices of Recovery, the Forerunner Foundation, the Rotondaro Family Trust, and the Embassy Series, Uniting People Through Musical Diplomacy. David, let's dial down a bit on Afghanistan. I see it as a military, an intelligence failure, a military failure, a human failure. Just a sad day in our history, huh?
I think it is sad that we were not able, despite 20 years of war, to achieve the war aims that we had set. Having traveled there many times, 15 times or more over the last couple decades, I saw each commander of American forces in what I've described as a bubble of optimism. Military commanders, military in general, don't like to say we can't get the job done. So year after year, I would hear these four-star generals say, "We can do it, Mr. President. This is a mission that we know how to do it. I just need more troops." It was a little bit like Vietnam. Need more troops. This enemy is pre-modern. We'll figure out a way to establish order. And our problem was that our partner in Afghanistan was corrupt, was badly organized, did not have popular support. And the truth that we finally came to see on that day, August 15, when Kabul fell instantly to the Taliban, was that in some way the Taliban represented the spirit of the country, this rough, independent, resenting foreigners, temperament of the Afghan people, in a way that Ashraf Ghani, the president we supported, worked at the World Bank, a very modern, cosmopolitan man, never did. So I think it is painful to see that failure. One of the things that I've really admired is the way in which Afghans have become more modern in so many parts of the country. If you haven't been there, you probably think of Afghanistan as this sort of feudal regime, nothing but mud villages and simple people in turbans. It's a very urban place. 70 to 80% of the people watch television, have cell phones. Literacy has gone up. The education of women has grown astonishingly in the last 20 years. It's become quite a different place. And I think one truth is that the Taliban are going to have a lot of trouble governing a country that's not like their rural strongholds. Kabul is a big modern city, and people are not going to be easy to put back in a box for the Taliban. So, there's a way in which I guess social life, cultural life exists independent of politics and military affairs. Afghanistan has changed. We couldn't change it by force of arms, but the modernization that we brought, the money that we pumped into the country, to be honest, have changed it, and it'll be a different place. This idea is fallen back into the dark ages forever. Don't buy that. That's not true.
A couple of things. I don't know who to ask this, but I will ask it of you, because you know the territory. When they talk about the Afghani regime and they talk about corruption, what does corruption mean? What did that corruption look like in Afghanistan before the fall?
So one way to describe the corruption is to describe where the money went. People obviously had lucrative contracts. The American military comes into a place and it hires people to move concrete barriers for perimeters for security, and it hires people to bring in food, and it hires truck drivers, and it hires people to bring the gasoline to power the trucks, and everybody takes a skim off of every contract. And if you want to know where the money went, just fly over Dubai or one of the other Emirates and look at the modern apartments, the villas. People got rich. I mean, there was a daily flight from Kabul to the UAE, and people were on that flight, and there were a lot of people who made money and wanted to get it out of the country. I think they never fully believed that the regime would be stable, so they wanted their money out. So that's part of what the corruption looks like. The corruption also looks like a government that fell in one day. Corruption eats societies from the inside out, and they may look stable, but in the insides, they're just rotting, and they fall faster than you could imagine. And that's what we saw happen in August. It was a shock, even to our most cynical intelligence analysts who said, well, it's going to be gone by Thanksgiving or Christmas. It was gone in a day. The president left, and by the end of that day, the Taliban had taken the presidential palace. So that's what corruption looks like.
When you looked at General Milley and General McKenzie, and Secretary Austin up there on the deck testifying. What did you learn from that testimony that you didn't know before the testimony?
Well, the first thing that I'd say is that I learned that the military had decided to make an honest accounting of its failure. I didn't hear people pretending it wasn't so. Milley said it straight up. This is a strategic failure. The Taliban are in charge in Kabul. And if you know General Milley, he has been a real commander of troops in the field. He's seen the face of this battle. And every one of these four-star generals, Dennis, has a relative, a friend's son or daughter who's been killed or wounded in this war. Yeah, so it's very personal for them. And I thought that in their testimony, we saw them trying to be honest with the American people about the war. They made clear that it had not been their desire to do what President Biden ordered. President Biden decided he wanted out. And he asked for the advice of his generals, and his generals said, "Sir, we think that's a mistake. We think we should keep a limited number of troops. 2,500 is the number that we had at the end, and we should keep them there for an indefinite period to try to stabilize the country."
David, let me just jump in.
Biden decided he didn't want to do it.
The magic number of 2,500 troops. When did the generals convey that to the president? Is there a date or a period of time?
So from the time that Biden took office, January 20, until he announced his decision to withdraw in mid-April, there was intense debate between the White House and the Pentagon about what to do. And the generals, starting with General Scott Miller, based in Kabul, made their recommendation. Mr. President, we believe that if we pull American forces out, this government is going to fall. Don't know how long, but it will not survive without American support, American contractors, American military as a kind of prop. Let's be honest. And Biden responded, if I don't pull the troops out, the Taliban's going to go on the offensive again.
Yes.
They've held off. It's true. They stopped attacking American troops after the peace deal that was made in February 2020. Mm-hmm. So Biden said, aren't we going to have to put in more troops? And the general said, yes, sir. We may have to put in a limited number of additional troops. And the numbers that I heard were, we might go from 2,500 to 4,000, 4,500. When you think of how many troops we've had in Korea and Germany since our wars there, it's not that many. Biden considered it, and he decided they want to pull the troops out anyway. The generals, quite properly, because in our system, civilians control military decisions. The general said, yes, sir. And man, they pulled those troops out fast, almost too fast. By July 1, the American troops were almost all gone.
So the recommendation by the generals to the president started kind of before the president announced the August 31st date. Am I correct about that?
Yes. So this debate went on, as I say, January, February, March, and then by mid-April, the president made up his mind he wanted to do it. You remember that President Trump had made the same decision. He wanted all troops out by January 15. The generals slow rolled it, and they managed to kind of back him down. They couldn't slow roll Biden. He was determined to do this.
I need you to help me understand this, because the 2,500 troops looms large. But this story caught my attention way back when, and I don't think it's over. General McKenzie admitted that the Taliban offered to let the United States secure Kabul during the evacuation, but he did not consider it a formal offer. So if I understand correctly, David, and I really want you to explain this to our viewers and to me. So McKenzie is in Doha. He's meeting with the head of the Taliban, or at least a spokesperson for the Taliban, but way up high. And the Taliban leader says to him, you can control Kabul. We'll stay out until the magic date of August 31st. You will control it. If that had happened, the access to the airport for all of these people would have been much freer. Why was that turned down, number one? And was that a bigger blunder than anything that's been put on the table so far?
It's a great question, Dennis. I'll tell you what I know of the background. As the Taliban in August began to sweep through district capitals and then the big provincial capitals, first in the north, in Ghazni and Mazar-e Sharif, and then in the south, it was obvious that Kabul was heading toward a final battle. And there were intensive negotiations taking place between US and Taliban representatives about some process of transition, because it was clear that the Ghani government couldn't survive. So there was an effort to figure out, is there a transitional arrangement that will avoid a final battle of Kabul, which would have been very, very bloody for both sides. There was one place it was thought that the government's army was strong. And those negotiations were ongoing. At the moment that President Ashraf Ghani panicked and fled, leaving his chief of staff and other key members of his government just sitting there as the helicopter took off. So that's the moment at which Taliban representative Mullah Baradar says to General McKenzie, basically, either you take Kabul or we'll take Kabul, but somebody is going to have to control the city because the army is melted. As soon as the president left, the army just collapsed. So who is going to take Kabul? And it's my understanding that the judgment that General McKenzie made was that controlling Kabul, a huge urban area of 10 million people, would have required, in effect, a reinvasion of Afghanistan. Remember, we'd pulled down by that point to 650 troops. Just to secure the airport, we needed to put in between 4,000 and 5,000 troops. To take all of Kabul would have required substantially more. And the decision was, I'm sure this was President Biden's view, this is not the time to reinvade Afghanistan. So instead, the decision was, let's hold the airport and let's conduct an evacuation.
But my question, David, is this. I think there are more questions to be asked of General McKenzie. I think he should be brought back to testify under oath, because this is a huge thing. It was not General McKenzie's responsibility or position to make that decision to blow that offer off the table. I think that we have a conversation around here about if somebody shows up and they've got a dart sticking out of the middle of their head, your natural question is, what's the story on that dart sticking out of your head? Okay? If the Taliban says you can control, but it might have required many more troops, that's an important piece of information to go from General McKenzie to Secretary Austin to the president. And that requires some time. I think to dismiss it as it was not a formal offer is self-protection.
So, Dennis, I basically agree with you that there's more that we need to know, and you've rightly focused on the events of that day. That day, we need to know a lot more about it. We need to know about President Ghani's flight, what prompted it, who he told. But it's my understanding, and I need to do more research about this, that General Mackenzie did speak up the chain of command about the situation.
No, he said, David, he said in his testimony that our U.S. representative was there and he heard it. I think that's passing the buck a little bit.
Mackenzie, I've known well. I've traveled all over the region with him many times. Generals in that situation don't act unilaterally. It's just not the way the military works. The idea that this was Mackenzie's decision alone, I can't imagine that.
For information about This Is America and the World, visit our website, ThisIsAmerica.net, or our YouTube channel, This Is America TV, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Underwriting for This Is America and the World is made possible by the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., the Republic of Uzbekistan, the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Morocco, the National Association for Children of Addiction, Faces and Voices of Recovery, the Forerunner Foundation, the Rotondaro Family Trust, and the Embassy Series, Uniting People Through Musical Diplomacy.